There's a moment right before you sign your name where everything stops. It's just you, a piece of paper, and a principle. For Jordan, that principle was tithing. 10%. 10% off the top. Before taxes, before his 401k, and before he even thought about saving for a future. At 32, it felt like it was breathing down his neck. A future that included a wedding he couldn't quite afford to propose for, and kids he couldn't yet picture in a college tuition bill. And in that frozen moment, all he could see was Pastor John's watch. He noticed it because of the bling, and also because he loved watches himself. A Rolex. A subtle shimmering thing on his wrist last Sunday as he preached about the widow's mite. The tiny sacrificial coins she gave that were worth more than all the wealth of the Pharisees. The irony was so thick you could taste it, like metal on your tongue. This wasn't a new feeling. This was the climax of a slow, simmering disillusionment. It had been building for over a year. It was the church's new vision campaign for a multi-million-dollar family life center, complete with a rock-climbing wall. Jordan had volunteered with the youth group. What those kids needed wasn't a rock wall. It was a couple of dedicated mentors, and maybe some help with their homework. It was the leaked staff email, accidentally sent to the whole prayer chain, where the church business administrator questioned the cost of the pastor's proposed sabbatical tour of the Holy Land. First class, all the way, round trip. The excuse later was that it was a private donor, but the stench of hypocrisy lingered. Jordan's justification wasn't just logical, it was visceral. It was about his sister, Iana, a freshman at State College, already buried under student loans, talking about dropping out because the pressure was too much. He could cover her books for a semester with what he put in that offering basket. It was about the ring for Maya, a beautiful, simple diamond he'd been saving for 2 years. Every $100 he gave to the church felt like another month added to that timeline. He saw Maya's face, he saw Iana's anxiety, and then he saw Pastor John's Instagram feed, a curated gallery of luxury resorts, fancy dinners, and that damn watch. He wasn't rebelling against God. He was, in his mind, conducting a rescue operation, saving his faith from the grifters. So he made a decision that felt less like disobedience and more like a strategic redistribution. He closed the checkbook. He wouldn't sign. Not for the church. Instead, he became a giving ninja. He set up automatic monthly donations to 3 different places: a local homeless shelter that published its financials online, a nonprofit that dug wells in Sudan, and a fund for underprivileged kids in his own city to play sports. This felt clean. This felt righteous. He could see the impact, track the dollars. It was generosity with transparency, faith with accountability. On Sundays, when the polished wooden plates glided down the row, he'd pass them along with a clean conscience. He was still a giver, arguably a better one. For a while it was great. He felt smart, ethically superior. He helped Iana with her textbooks and saw the genuine relief in her eyes. He put an extra $100 into the Maya fund. He was being a good brother, a faithful boyfriend, a globally conscious citizen. He had outsmarted the system. But then he ran into Ethan. Ethan was a guy about his age from the church, someone he'd always vaguely liked. They got stuck next to each other at a dreadfully boring community fundraiser. During a lull, Ethan, without any prompting, started talking. His wife had postpartum depression, badly. She needed intensive therapy, the kind their insurance scoffed at. "We were drowning," Ethan said, his voice low and raw. "I didn't know who to talk to. I was so ashamed. I finally broke down and called Pastor John I don't know, for a prayer or something." Jordan braced himself for a story about being offered a pamphlet. "But he listened," Ethan continued, a look of awe still on his face. Ethan told Jordan how Pastor John looked at him and said, "The church is here to bear this burden with you." They covered 80% of the cost for 6 months. Pastor John told him that, "This is what the tithe is for. This is the storehouse." "That money. Man, it saved my wife. It saved my family," Ethan said. The air went out of Jordan's lungs. The rock-climbing wall, the watch, the first-class tickets. They were all still there, glaring facts in his mind. But now, superimposed over them, was Ethan's wife, healthy and smiling, holding her baby. Was Pastor John funding excess? Almost certainly. But was he also inadvertently funding a lifeline for people like Ethan? A lifeline he never saw, because it was handled with quiet dignity. The conflict that erupted in his chest wasn't a simple one. It was a war between two truths. The truth that some leaders abuse their position, and the truth that God can use flawed systems to perform perfect acts of grace. He went home that night and did something he hadn't done in months. He actually opened his Bible, not to find ammunition, but to find answers. And his eyes fell on a verse in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 23, verse 23. Christ is raging against the religious leaders of his day. "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others." It was a double-edged sword that cut him clean in half. Christ affirmed the tithe. These you ought to have done, but he condemned the heart that could meticulously count out seeds while ignoring justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Jordan realized his heart had been all about a human sense of justice, judging Pastor John's finances, while neglecting the mercy that was somehow, miraculously, still flowing through that very same system. He was so focused on the misuse of funds that he became blind to their proper use. He was neglecting the others, the simple, stubborn act of obedience itself. The resolution wasn't a neat bow. Pastor John still drove a nice car. Jordan still thought the rock wall was a dumb idea. He didn't suddenly trust the church finances implicitly. But something had shifted. The following Sunday, he wrote 2 checks. One was to New Genesis Church. It wasn't the full 10%, it was 5. It was a step, an act of faith, a choice to trust that God was bigger than a pastor's bad spending habits. It was his way of saying, "I'm doing this for you, God, not for him." The second check was for Iyana's next semester. And that one, he signed with a new sense of freedom. He hadn't solved the problem of corruption in megachurches, but he had confronted the corruption in his own heart. The pride of thinking his judgment was the ultimate arbitrator of God's work. His giving was no longer a single, conflicted transaction. It became a portfolio of obedience, a portion in faith to the sometimes flawed storehouse, and a portion in direct, joyful mercy to the needs right in front of him. The knot in his soul finally loosened, not because all his questions were answered, but because he'd finally stopped making his obedience conditional on everyone else's perfection. If this messy, real struggle between faith and finances hit home for you, you're not alone. This channel is for all of us navigating the complexities of belief without the easy answers. If you want to walk this road with us, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone else who's asking the tough questions. Let's keep building this community. Thanks for watching.